are you from, and would you like to give a shout out to anyone in the hood?
Well, guys, I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, which is upstate New York, more like Canada and country than New York City. Of course, shout out to my OG crew at La Valley Sport Karate. One of my best friends in the world I grew up with, Jim Andrello, has a team called Impact Martial Arts up there. And we got our black belts together back in Kempo, like 1985, I believe. And he's doing his thing up there. He's actually had world champions in glory kickboxing. And we're both getting ready to go to Germany in October as coaches of Team USA. So pretty cool that over 40 years ago we started martial arts in a little town outside of Syracuse, New York. And now we're both like coaching on the world stage, so it's pretty cool. So shout out to Impact MMA and Jim Andrello.
At what age did you start martial arts?
I was 11, 1981. In the fall, because I remember I was playing a video game, Pac-Man, at the corner store, the Stop and Go, and there was a kid that was playing the game. I had my quarter for on deck, but this kid was so good at the game, it was pissing me off. So he had me waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So finally, my hyper ass grabbed the joystick and ruined his game. So he got all pissed off. I'm gonna have my brother come beat you up. And I said, same week, my dad's a police officer in our little town called Liverpool, New York. Pulls over what will become later my sensei, Steve LaValle. So same week, Steve says, hey, bring your son up Saturday to the dojo in the village of Liverpool and he can check it out. So I had this altercation during the week with this kid who said his brother's gonna beat me up, he does karate. Saturday morning, I end up going to this dojo, walk up the stairs, and dude, I tell you what, I'll never forget it as long as I live. 11 years old, I walk up these stairs, the smell of feet, sweat, and I walk up the stairs, I look over, all these kids are getting it, sparring, going after it, banging. I was like, damn, I was a little bit scared, but a little bit excited. And between the rounds, Sensei came over and introduced himself to me. Sure enough, this kid, Jimmy Andrello, was in the room, and ended up meeting him that way instead of that kid kicked my ass for years. He was a couple years younger than me, but he kicked my ass for basically my whole teenage life, you know what I mean? So anyways, yeah, that's how I ended up in martial arts.
That's cool. And I think you already answered this, but what was your first gym?
La Valley Sport Karate. It was kind of, even for back in the day when it was more traditional, you had like your Kung Fu, your Taekwondo, your Kempo, your Goju, whatever your style was your style. My sensei and instructors back then were doing the American Kempo system, but also, my coach had like Golden Gloves boxing. My other coach was doing PKA kickboxing. So we kind of got the mix of styles like right from the jump, even though it was an American Kempo school. We had some Kung Fu, we had some boxing, we had some kickboxing, we had a little bit of everything. My sensei used to actually call it back in those days mixed up martial arts instead of mixed martial arts. It's pretty cool.
All right. The next question was going to be who's your first coach, but you answered that too.
Yes. See, I'm good. I tell you, I'm a good storyteller. Of course, besides Coach Lavelle, did you look up to anyone? Who inspired you? Back in those days, man, we kind of came up in the generation of like the 80s. So I would say one of my mentors back then, a guy I really looked up to, was Bill Superfoot Wallace. He was a super middleweight world champion for years and years, undefeated.
One of the first commentators in the UFC?
He was UFC #1, first commentator in the UFC, Elvis Presley's bodyguard. Bill Wallace was a badass, and he was good friends with my first sensei, so we went to a lot of his seminars. He'd come to our school, give classes. So definitely my first martial arts, guy that I looked up to.
In college, you make friends and colleagues for life. In the gym, we have a brotherhood of sorts. But in most cases, there's some people, or whether in or out of the gym, past or still with us, that keep you going. Do you have any? And if so, who is that for you?
Good question, man. There's a lifetime now of martial arts looking back. Yes, lots of mentors, lots of great coaching, senseis, teammates, friends. Man, that's a tough one. I kind of already talked a little bit about Jimmy, growing up with him. I would say I came down to Florida in 1992, and in 93 I took over the school East West Karate in Coral Springs. And I went through, the training there, and then we added in like kickboxing. MMA started becoming a thing. So we were trying to figure it out still at that time. So it's kind of like, the opportunity to battle test like techniques and really see, hey, what's really working in an actual fight. But along with those times, I kind of got away a little bit from I think being a true martial artist. And then my friend Jimmy was down in Florida. He was actually fighting down here, and I went to see his fight, and we hadn't seen each other in a few years. It was kind of him that put me back on the martial arts track, late 90s, and that's when, we kind of started our Olympiad Training Center, which was really the first MMA training facility in Florida, like way before American Top Team, way before like kind of mixed martial arts was a thing. I had partnered up with a guy, Alex Davis, who is now one of the big managers in MMA. So, yeah, that's going back.
That's going back. That's going back to my time.
Yes,
that's going back to my time.
Right.
Just so you know.
Oh.
So how did you become involved in coaching?
Man, honestly, when I came up as a teenager, we were always kind of helping out like the underbelts with class, so it was kind of like a natural progression of martial arts. So as teenagers, we would teach like the young kids class or help teach, like assist. And, I learned, how to coach. My sensei at the time as a teenager had us reading books, Dale Carnegie books, like how to deal with people, Tony Robbins, all these motivational books and seminars. So that was kind of part of my upbringing, aside from just learning the martial arts, learning how to be a communicator. Did very well as an amateur, won some big tournaments, in karate. Was national champion in U.S. Open 3 times for point karate, continuous fighting, kickboxing. Mixed martial arts just started. I didn't wrestle or grapple. I wrestled enough for street fights and self-defense. But when I started seeing the level of like the pro athletes, it was like a huge jump. It was kind of the point when I was still competing as a pro that I realized like coaching was going to be my path. I honestly felt like training, especially when I started training like at American Top Team in 2004 with a bunch of killers and monsters. I was like, man, these guys are serious business. Even though on the feet, I felt like I could deal with guys, but as soon as the grappling started, I was like, man, this is a whole nother world, So being a part of, smaller teams and being a part of, the biggest MMA team in the world, the best MMA team in the world for almost 20 years, man, American Top Team, you learn a lot of how to manage a team, you know what I mean? So it's like, to manage a team like that is crazy with all these different personalities and fighters from all over the world, So we want to be able to put our time and our focus and energy into the athletes that we have, and and obviously try to help them reach their goals of becoming champions, but also try to make sure that after fighting, they have some type of sense of what they want to do, whether it's to own a gym or do something else.
As a kid, I was stuck to the TV during Kung Fu Theater and couldn't wait to see the next Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee movie. For me, Bruce Lee was the original MMA guy until I met you.
Yeah.
Other than Bruce, everyone thought their martial art was the best.
Yeah.
You were a pioneer in mixed martial arts. You advocated and promoted, managed and coached. You fought in both roped and caged rings and have trained with some of the best MMA fighters in the world. As a kickboxer and an Ed Parker Kempo Karate Dojo owner and teacher, what gave you the push to MMA, and when did you realize it was the future?
Man, that's a good one. It, obviously '93 when UFC 1 happened, we all, we were all sitting there saying, wow, man, this is pretty awesome. But for guys in the know, like guys in MMA, like me, the Gracies have been running ads in Black Belt magazines since like the late 70s. They had like a $10,000 challenge, bring your team to Brazil and we'll beat you, So there was basically a challenge that had gone on for years and years. Then when it came obviously to the States and they branded it, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, it was a it was a big eye opener for a lot of people. It was a big eye opener about the days of, because back in those days that's how they promoted it: karate versus boxing, wrestling versus jiu-jitsu. Basically style versus style. So it kind of exposed a lot of holes and a lot of styles. Two guys that I knew fought in UFC '1. One was Kevin Rosier. He was a super heavyweight champion of the world from Buffalo, New York, and this guy was knocking everybody out. 6'5", 340 pounds, just monster of a guy. I had trained with this guy. In my mind, I'm like, he's gonna go into the UFC and smash everybody, right? He made it. The other guy he fought was Zane Frazier, which was a Kempo guy from California. It was one of Joe Palonzo's black belts, and I had known him from WK, from the Kempo karate circuit. And I was like, Kevin Rosier will knock this guy out, which they fought in the first round. Kevin wins, and then Kevin ends up losing in the second round. And then all of a sudden, Royce Gracie comes out and starts choking people to sleep, So obviously super impressive. Around that same time, I had a friend that had a Taekwondo school in Texas. And Texas, the Gracies had kind of started going into California. The Machados had started going into Texas. And this kid was a blue belt with the Machados. He owned a Taekwondo school. He was like a 3rd, 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo. And, kid I knew well, so he used to come visit our school in Coral Springs. And we would train together. Ends up catching me in a triangle. So then I'm like, dude, you got to show me this stuff. What is this stuff? You know what I mean? So that was kind of my first taste of actually learning some moves. But yeah, it was a huge eye opener. He was fighting at the time in Texas. They had like these shoot boxing tournaments, and he was doing well. So that was the first time I actually kind of got to train with somebody that did it.
We were next door to jiu-jitsu, and we went next door and we trained.
Yeah.
What was that Machado's first name? I never got it right.
That was Alvaro Leal. That was at Olympia Training Center. That was, so when we had that space over there in Coral Springs, we had merged a bunch of different styles together, right? So I had, I had a big karate program at the time. Actually, in the '90s, we had the largest karate school in the United States. We had over 1,000 students in Coral Springs. So we ended up kind of merging a bunch of schools together. So we had the karate, we had
boxing,
my friend Scott
kickboxing.
Ashley was the kickboxing world champion.
Judo,
kickboxing
jiu-jitsu.
there. Alex Davis was the judo coach there. Alvaro Leal was the first jiu-jitsu coach there. Then after him, we had Royce Gracie when he was a purple belt. I would say 96 to 98, somewhere around there. So this is after UFC already started, because Alex was good friends with Marco Ruas, who, King of the Streets from Brazil, was the UFC heavyweight champion at the time. I was starting to really follow Boss Rutten at that time. So, man, another huge shout out to Boss, because I still do, a lot of his system. I still do his Boss Rutten workouts with at least a few weeks out of the year for conditioning. I had his big books of combat. I had all his VHS tapes, and literally we would watch VHS tapes and train the moves, you know what I mean? So that's back in the day how we were learning, because we were learning like the classical jiu-jitsu, like in the gi, which obviously for MMA had to be adapted, but obviously now we know, much better, what works. It's 30 years I've been, in the business, so now I'm training like their kids, I'm training people's grandkids now, you know what I mean? So it's like, hey, I trained with you 30 years ago in Coral Springs.
That's
I'm like,
crazy.
Wow, so yeah, it's pretty crazy.